All right, let's go. Number 10. Al-Idrisi World Map, 1154. In the year 1154, in the court of King Roger II of Sicily in Palermo, a Moroccan geographer named Muhammad al-Idrisi finished a silver disc. It weighed over 300 pounds. Engraved into its surface was the known world. 15 years of labor, funded by a Christian king who trusted a Muslim scholar over his own bishops. Al-Idrisi called it the Tabula Rogeriana. The book that came with it was called simply The Book of Pleasant Journeys into Faraway Lands. Here is the scale of the impossible. Al-Idrisi's map remained the most accurate depiction of the known world for the next 300 years. Not decades, centuries. He placed the source of the Nile with a precision that European cartographers would not match again until the 1800s, when British explorers physically walked to Lake Victoria to confirm it. He mapped rivers, mountains, and trade routes across 3 continents, using nothing but sailor reports and mathematics. No satellites, just conversation and calculation. But here is where the story turns unsettling. The original silver disc no longer exists. It was destroyed in a palace riot in 1160, just 6 years after its completion. Melted down for its metal in a political uprising nobody remembers the details of. What survives are copies of the book, scattered across libraries in Paris, Oxford, and Cairo. Each one slightly different, each one a shadow of the original. We are looking at the memory of the most accurate map of its age. And nobody has ever fully explained how a scholar working from a palace in Sicily, without leaving the Mediterranean, achieved a level of geographic accuracy that took Europe 600 more years of ships, wars, and dead sailors to rediscover. What is left now is paper. Fragile, yellowed paper, held in climate-controlled vaults, guarded more carefully than the men who made them were guarded in life. The silver is gone. The palace is gone. The riot that destroyed it is a footnote. Only the ghost of the map remains. Number 9. Fra Mauro Map, 1450. In a monastery on the island of Murano, near Venice, a monk named Fra Mauro spent years building a map that would take his name into history. Completed around 1450, it was circular, nearly 2 meters across, densely packed with over 3,000 written descriptions of lands and trade routes, commissioned, according to some accounts, for the King of Portugal himself. Here is where the impossible enters the frame. Fra Mauro's map shows the southern tip of Africa as circumnavigable by sea, a route connecting the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean, drawn nearly 50 years before Vasco da Gama actually sailed around the Cape of Good Hope in 1497 and proved it was possible. A monk working from second-hand reports appears to have known the shape of Africa's coastline before the greatest navigators of the age dared to test it with their own lives. But here is where history gets genuinely disturbing. Fra Mauro cited a source for parts of his information that historians still argue about today. A ship, described in his own annotations, that supposedly sailed from India, around Africa, and into the Atlantic, decades before European explorers. He wrote it down as fact, in his own hand, on the map itself. Was it Chinese record? Arab trade knowledge lost to time? A garbled account of something else entirely? Nobody knows. The annotation exists. The explanation does not. What remains is the map itself, preserved in Venice, its ink slowly fading, its sources undocumented and unrecoverable. A monk who never sailed anywhere may have known the true shape of Africa before the men who risked drowning to find out. His notes point toward a voyage, a knowledge lost between his time and ours, never found. Number 8. The Dulcert Portolan Chart, 1339. In 1339, a cartographer named Angelino Dulcert produced a Portolan chart, a practical navigational sea chart marked with compass roses and coastlines drawn from direct observation, covering the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, and significant portions of the West African coastline. Here is the scale that should not be possible. In 1339, European sailors had not yet ventured far down the West African coast. The Portuguese voyages of discovery would not begin in earnest until the 1400s, under Prince Henry the Navigator. Yet Dulcert's chart already shows African coastal features with a level of accuracy that suggests someone had already sailed there and returned to report it. This was not myth, this was working data. But here is where the turn happens. No surviving record explains who actually sailed that coastline before 1339. No expedition logs, no named captain, no royal charter authorizing the voyage. The knowledge simply appears on the chart, fully formed, a century before the official history says anyone should have had it. Historians have proposed lost Genoese expeditions, forgotten Arab traders, and undocumented fishing fleets. All theories, none proven. What is left is the chart itself, one of the oldest portolans to survive intact, its coastlines quietly contradicting the history books shelved a few rooms away. Somebody sailed that coast. Somebody came home. Their name was never written down. Number 7. The Zeno Map, 1380. Published in Venice in 1558, the Zeno Map claimed to be based on letters in a chart from the 1380s, compiled by two Venetian brothers, Niccolo and Antonio Zeno, who claimed to have sailed the North Atlantic in service of a mysterious nobleman named Zikmi. It depicts a landmass many researchers identify as Greenland. Here is the detail that unsettles cartographers to this day. The Zeno map shows Greenland's coastline in a configuration that does not match a glaciated landmass, with mountain ranges and coastal shapes that modern researchers have compared to radar-mapped subglacial topography, the actual shape of the rock beneath the ice, not what you would see on the surface today. In the 1380s, no instrument existed that could see through a mile of ice. But here is where it becomes deeply strange. The Zeno brothers' account describes a monastery on Greenland, warmed by volcanic springs, monks growing vegetables in the far north, boats sailing waters that are now permanently sealed beneath ice. For centuries, historians dismiss the entire document as an elaborate hoax fabricated by a descendant of the Zeno family for personal glory. And yet, the coastal outlines keep drawing uncomfortable comparisons to modern subglacial surveys conducted with radar equipment that did not exist until the 20th century. What survives is a single printed map from 1558, copied from documents that have since vanished, describing a version of Greenland that, if real, existed before the ice sealed it away. The original letters are gone. The monastery, if it ever stood, is buried under ice that is not melted in human memory. Number 6. The Vinland Map. In 1965, Yale University unveiled a medieval map that appeared to show a landmass west of Greenland, labeled Vinlanda Insula, Vinland Island, dated stylistically to around 1440, roughly 50 years before Columbus. If genuine, it would be physical proof that Norse contact with North America was known and documented in European cartography before the official age of discovery began. Here is why it detonated the historical world. A map showing North America, drawn with enough detail to suggest real geographic knowledge, dated decades before Columbus's voyage, would rewrite the entire narrative of who discovered the Americas and when Europe first knew about them. Yale's unveiling was front-page news. For a moment, 500 years of accepted history cracked open. But here is where the nightmare really begins. Chemical analysis of the ink in the 20th century detected titanium dioxide in a form called anatase, a compound not manufactured for pigment use until the 1920s. The map that was supposed to prove Norse discovery of America may itself be a modern forgery, grafted onto genuine medieval parchment by someone with extraordinary skill and access to real 15th century materials. Decades of scientific testing have gone back and forth, some studies supporting forgery, others finding the case unproven, and the debate has never fully closed, even now. What remains is a piece of parchment locked in a Yale vault, real medieval material carrying either an authentic secret or an elaborate lie, and nobody alive can say with total certainty which. Somebody either erased America from a page that once proved it, or built a 500-year-old ghost out of ink and vellum. Either way, the truth is sealed behind glass. Number 5. Zheng He's purported 1418 world map. In 1418, according to a controversial map that surfaced in 2001, Chinese Admiral Zheng He commanded treasure fleets of ships so massive that European vessels of the same era would have looked like toys beside them. The map, said to be an 18th century copy of a 1418 original, claims to depict the Americas, drawn by Chinese cartographers 74 years before Columbus ever left Spain. Here is the scale that makes historians uneasy even when they reject the map outright. Zheng He's real, documented voyages were undeniably massive, Fleets of hundreds of ships, some reportedly over 400 feet long, carrying tens of thousands of sailors, reaching as far as East Africa between 1405 and 1433. This was recorded imperial policy, dwarfing anything Europe would send to sea for another century. If even a fraction of that fleet's reach extended further than the record admits, the entire timeline of global exploration would need rewriting. But here is where the story turns genuinely disorienting. The 1418 map itself is considered by the overwhelming majority of serious historians and cartographic experts to be a modern fabrication. Its owner unable to produce convincing provenance, its geographic details riddled with inconsistencies that suggest later knowledge bleeding backward into a falsely aged document. And yet the question it raises refuses to fully die. With fleets that large, sailing that far, for that long, is it truly impossible that Chinese ships went further east than the record admits, and that record was simply erased, lost, or never written down in the first place? What remains is a genuine mystery wrapped around a fake map. Zheng He's real fleets were burned by imperial order decades after his death, when a new emperor turned China inward and erased the evidence of its own ocean ambition on purpose. Whatever those ships actually saw beyond the horizon went down with them, and no forged map can bring it back. Number 4. The Buach Map, 1737. In 1737, French geographer Philippe Buach published a map showing Antarctica not as a single frozen continent, but as two separate landmasses divided by a strait, with the surrounding seas marked ice-free. Antarctica itself would not be officially sighted by human eyes for another 83 years. Here is the detail that should not be possible under any conventional explanation. In 1958, a Soviet-American seismic survey used sound waves to map the bedrock of Antarctica beneath its ice sheet. The results confirmed Antarctica's landmass actually is divided by a deep channel, roughly where Buach placed his strait 2 centuries earlier, separating West Antarctica from East Antarctica. A cartographer with no ships capable of reaching the ice somehow placed a geological feature on paper that would only be confirmed by sound waves fired into solid ice 221 years later. But here is where it turns into something closer to dread. Buach never claimed to have discovered this himself. He explicitly stated he was compiling and reconciling older source maps, some of which are now lost entirely, whose origins he never fully documented. He was not the discoverer. He was a copyist working from something older, something that has not survived, something that apparently already knew the bedrock shape of a continent buried under ice that no human of his era could have penetrated. What is left is the printed map, its underlying sources gone, its accuracy scientifically confirmed, its origin unexplained. Somewhere in the chain of copies stretching back before 1737, someone knew what was under Antarctica's ice. We do not know who. We do not know how. The channel is still there, buried under 2 miles of frozen silence, exactly where the ghost of an old map said it would be. Number 3. Oronteus Finaeus Map, 1531. In 1531, French cartographer Oronteus Finaeus published a heart-shaped world map depicting a southern polar continent in remarkable detail. Coastlines, mountain ranges, bays, and river systems, on a landmass that would not be officially discovered by human explorers until 1820, nearly 300 years later. Here is where the scale becomes almost impossible to accept. The coastline Finaeus drew has been compared by researchers to modern maps of Antarctica's subglacial bedrock, the actual rock surface beneath the ice, mapped in the 20th century using seismic and radar equipment fired through more than a mile of solid ice. The river valleys and mountain chains he drew align in troubling ways with that subglacial terrain. To draw that with any accuracy, someone would have needed to see Antarctica's coastline before it was buried under ice geologists say has covered it for thousands of years. But here is where the true unease sets in. Finaeus, like Buach after him, was working from older sources, Portolan-style charts and reference maps that predate his own work and have since been lost. He was not exploring. He was copying and compiling, the same way scribes across the ancient and medieval world copied texts whose original authors and original observations had already vanished into unrecorded history. Somewhere in that unbroken chain of copying, someone stood on ice-free ground, or sailed an ice-free coast, and wrote down what they saw, at a time period science says should have been physically impossible for any known civilization capable of producing accurate cartography. What remains is a heart-shaped map in a library collection, older than the discovery it seems to predict, its sources permanently lost, its coastline still sitting under the ice, undisturbed, waiting. Number 2. The Piri Reis Map, 1513. In 1513, Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis compiled a map of the Atlantic world on gazelle skin parchment, drawn in Constantinople using, according to his own written notes, older source maps, some reportedly traced back to charts used by Christopher Columbus himself, only 2 decades after Columbus's first voyage. The surviving fragment was rediscovered in 1929 in the Topkapi Palace Library, where it had sat forgotten for centuries. Here is the detail that made this the most famous cartographic anomaly on Earth. The map appears to show the northern coastline of a landmass some researchers identify as Antarctica's Queen Maud Land, resembling the ice-free, rock-bed coastline confirmed by a 1949 British-Swedish seismic survey, using sound waves to detect what lies beneath the ice, not what sits on top of it. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820. Its subglacial coastline was not confirmed until the mid-20th century. Piri Reis produced his map 300 years before the first, and over 400 before the second. But here is where history becomes something closer to a warning. Piri Reis wrote directly on the map that he compiled it from roughly 20 older source charts, some ancient, some contemporary, gathered from sailors and libraries across the known world, none of which survive today. He was explicit that he was not the original observer. He was the last link in a chain of knowledge stretching back into a past nobody can identify, copying details onto skin and ink that the rest of the chain has since lost completely to fire, war, and time. Mainstream geologists point out that Antarctica has been ice-covered for millions of years, making any direct human observation of an ice-free coastline scientifically implausible under current models. And the map's Antarctic identification remains fiercely disputed among cartographic historians. But the coincidence has never been fully explained away either. What remains is a single, torn fragment of gazelle skin in a Turkish palace vault, a fraction of a map once far larger, copied from sources that no longer exist, describing a coastline modern instruments can only see through a mile of ice. The rest of the original map has never been found. Number 1. The Sinanmut Star Ceiling, Egypt, circa 1473 BCE. In the tomb of Sinanmut, chief steward and architect to Queen Hatshepsut of Egypt, archaeologists found a painted ceiling dating to around 1473 BCE, one of the oldest known astronomical star maps in history. It charts constellations, decans, and celestial positions with an internal consistency that shows genuine, long-term sky observation, not decoration. Here is where the scale stops being about geography and becomes about time itself. Egyptologists studying the ceiling note that certain celestial alignments appear to correspond to sky positions predating the dynasty in which Senenmut lived, suggesting the chart was copied from a far older source, or represents observational records passed down through generations of priest astronomers before it was ever painted. This was not one man looking up one night. This was inherited knowledge, a dataset older than the empire that commissioned it, sealed into a tomb meant to keep a single man's name alive forever. But here is where it becomes almost too large to hold in your mind. Star maps like Sinanmut's were not just religious art. They functioned as calendars and navigational references for a civilization that measured its own permanence in thousands of years. And still, that civilization is gone. Its temples are sand-scoured ruins. Its language sat unreadable for over 1,000 years until the Rosetta Stone cracked it open in 1822. The stars Sinanmut painted are still burning in the same sky above your house tonight. Everything else, the empire, the queen he served, the beliefs he died holding, dissolved into dust that tourists now walk across in sandals. What remains is paint on stone, in a chamber cut into a cliff face in the Valley of the Kings, still holding a sky that predates the pyramids by observation. The stars have not moved on. We are the ones who forgot how to read them. The Descent. 10 maps. 10 fragments of a picture no single civilization was ever allowed to see in full. A silver disc melted down for scrap. A monk's annotation about a ship nobody can trace. A forgery built from real medieval parchment. A fleet burned on imperial order, specifically so the world would forget how far it had sailed. Coastlines confirmed by sound waves, fired through ice into rock no human being alive when those maps were drawn should have been able to see. Notice the pattern underneath every single one of these. Almost none of the map makers claim to be the original observers. Piri Reis said he copied from 20 older charts. Buash said he compiled from older sources. Fra Mauro cited a ship and a voyage he did not make himself. Finaeus worked from portolans that no longer exist. Over and over, across 400 years and 3 continents, the men whose names we remember were the last surviving link in a chain of knowledge whose first link has been completely erased. We are not looking at 10 separate mysteries. We are looking at the same mystery, copied and recopied, degrading each time, like a photograph copied from a photograph, until the original face is almost gone, and yet still recognizable enough to unsettle us. Every civilization believes its knowledge is permanent. The Library of Alexandria burned. The Library of Baghdad's books were reportedly thrown into the Tigris in such numbers during the Mongol invasion of 1258 that the river ran black with ink for days. Zheng He's fleet was destroyed by imperial decree so completely that China spent the next 4 centuries deliberately forgetting how to build ships that size again. Knowledge is not a permanent structure. It is a fire that has to be tended, generation after generation, and every one of these maps is evidence of a moment the fire nearly went out. That is the quiet horror underneath all 10 of these maps. Not that ancient people knew things they should not have known. It is that we have no way of knowing how much they knew that never made it onto any surviving page at all. For every Piri Reis map that survived by accident in a forgotten palace drawer, how many others were burned, buried, or thrown away by someone who did not understand what they were holding? We call our own age the information age, certain nothing important could ever be lost again. And yet the servers and archives we trust to remember for us are exactly as fragile as a palace library in Baghdad. The ice over Antarctica is still there. The channel Buash mapped is still buried under 2 miles of it. Whatever civilization first charted that coastline is still unidentified, and it may stay that way forever, because the ones who knew never got the chance to write it down in a way that could survive us. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now, and make sure to subscribe.